Hello, my name is Jen Bauer. I'm an API testing lead, enthusiast, and educator, and this is Intro to API Testing. This is a brief training course that I gave to Women Who Code Greenville earlier in December, and I'm just recording it again so we have it for the future for all the folks who couldn't make it. Let's get started. First, I'm going to go over some session goals and the things that I'm hoping that we'll achieve through this training session today. I'm then going to cover some API related and quality assurance related terms. And then once we're through that, I'm going to talk about and show you some example APIs. We're going to make some requests and hopefully experiment a bit. And then I'm going to close out with some next steps and other places that you can go to explore and learn more. So before we begin, the software that we're using is called Postman. Postman can be used in the browser, or you can use it as a local desktop application. I actually prefer the desktop app, but for the sake of the training, I'm going to go ahead and use the browser so that we can have a little bit easier time switching between the presentation and the browser. But otherwise, the functionality is almost identical between the two, so you can follow along with either. There is a collection that we're going to look at for this session within a shared public workspace that I've made called WomenWhoCode GVL API Training. This is publicly accessible, and we will have a collection specific to this training within that space. So you can use that URL to go ahead and look at it through the browser, or you're welcome to use in this related import files Google Drive folder. You can grab an import JSON file to import into your Postman workspace. So you've got a lot of options there. There are other related files that are also in that Google Drive that we'll get to a little bit later. So you can just keep that handy. All right, let's talk about some session goals. So I would love for you to be comfortable and enjoy using the Postman app. So we're going to get acclimated so you have an idea of where different things are, get comfortable. Then we're going to send a few requests so that it's really clear where you go to do all of that. We're also going to make some assertions for those requests. We're going to verify the results of those requests align to our expectations that we have of those results. And then once we're done, we're going to make sure that you know where to go to explore and learn more all about API testing, should you like. So we've got some terms to cover first. So we're going to talk about request types. So I'm actually going to switch over to the Postman app right now. And we're going to take a look at some different requests that are in here, right? So this is the shared space, Women Who Code Greenville API Training. Within this space is this first group here, which is this December 2021 session. This is the collection. So within this collection, we're going to have different folders, and those folders are going to contain requests. So the requests are what we're actually here for, but just to give you an idea of what that hierarchy is. I'm going to be working directly in the workspace, this public workspace, as an administrator, but you may not be an administrator. So another easy way that you can make a copy of this to work with locally is to fork the collection. So once you hit these ellipses here, you can create a fork, and from there you can go ahead and make a copy in your own local workspace, which is usually called something like My Workspace. It can be whatever you want it to be. We're going to go into this first folder here where I have the agify.io, and I've got a couple of different requests that are here. Now I have in here this particular request is predict names age with a parameter. So this drop down right here has all of the different request types that are possible within the world of APIs. You have a lot of different varieties depending on what type of data you're sending and what type of action you're expecting to happen after you send that data. We're not going to go into all of these. I'm going to really just talk about the top two that I think you're likely to encounter the most and what we're going to cover in this training. The GET requests, where we are sending some data in anticipation of receiving some new information back, or the POST requests, where we're sending data, but we might not necessarily expect anything more than success or failure at a really simple level. So we're going to go ahead and send this particular request. And all we're doing here is hitting this send button. This particular request does not have a body, so there's nothing that is being sent other than this URL. And we get back a response body along with this 200 OK. So this 200 OK is pretty important. It lets us know that our request was successfully sent, and we've also received a successful response. So this is letting you know this is the happiest of paths that we can have in the API world. So we want to check, verify that this is the case, whenever we're sending a request. There are essentially 3 large buckets of response codes that you can typically have. There's actually plenty more outside of that, but for the purposes of our testing, the 200 usually mean that everything's going great. The 400 range typically means that me as the application sending the request probably has a formatting issue, or maybe some other, aspect of the data is just not quite right. So the application doesn't really know how to interpret that particular request. A 500 usually means you might have sent the correct things, but the application just cannot act on that data. It could be that you've sent it something it doesn't have the logic to process. It could be any number of things, but that is a sad path, or one of many sad paths. But most of the requests today are likely to be in the 200s. So we talked a little bit about request types and what the status code is. Let's take a look at these parameters. So this particular request is a GET request, and you can see here in the URL we've got question mark and then name equals Jen. And there's actually this params area of this request in Postman. There is a key value pair, where the key is essentially the type of thing that we're sending, the value is the actual value that we're sending here. So this particular API, ageify.io, tries to guess what your age is based on your name. So the guess it has here, which I appreciate the optimism, that if your name is Jen, you're likely to be at age 31 at the time you're sending the request. But we can update this value to be anything else that we want. So we could do Kara and send it, and it's guessing that the name Kara is 29. I can change this to another name. And as you can see, we can alternate these names very easily. This value is very easy to change out. But these are where the parameters could be, and you could potentially have more of them. So you could have a test parameter that equals 1, or whatever it might be. Now this particular API doesn't support this particular parameter, but I'm just showing you how easy it is to add into these fields and have it update to your URL. Super easy. All right, so we can take a look at authorization. This is another tab that you can look at per request. This will let you know if there is any sort of username or password you need for access, or possibly an access token. There are a lot of ways in the API world to verify that the application who is sending the request is actually allowed to do so by the application receiving the request. And if you don't get past that point for a secure API, then you're not going to get any information. You're not going to be able to send anything in and have anything happen. So it's yet another layer of security that you can have in your APIs. Now, the APIs I'm going to show you today pretty much don't have any authorization, at all, because they're public APIs and a lot of them are for educational use. But if you're in a corporate environment, it's very likely that you will either be building an API that has some form of authorization, or you're going to be working with APIs that already do. All right, so let's take a look at the headers. Yet another tab we have here. Headers provide additional context about the request. You can think of this as metadata that goes along with the body and the URL and anything else that's going on here, and just provide that additional context. So there are some hidden parameters here in the headers, and this right here has key value pairs yet again. So it has some details about it coming from Postman, and any sorts of encoding. It could be all sorts of things. A very common one would be the format that you want the response to come back in. Would you like it to be JSON or XML or any other particular language or flavor? And if that API supports you being able to receive that response in a different format, it'll go ahead and send it that way if you specified it here. And then here we go. We're going to take a look at the body. All right, so this particular request has an empty body, but we should soon have some other examples that will actually have some text here. And this is the actual meat and potatoes, the letter that goes in the envelope when you are talking to an API. So this is all of the fun data that you could be sending. So this particular one does not have one, but we'll have examples later that do. And in the case of these bodies, they could be formatted in all sorts of different ways. So you could actually be sending JSON, HTML, XML, maybe JavaScript, maybe just raw text. You could also do form data and do, yet again, some more key value pairs, depending on whatever it is that wants to receive, that information. So you got a lot of options here, even though this particular example doesn't have any. All right, so those are some API terms. So let's talk a little bit about QA terms, quality assurance, right? The biggest one that I want to talk about really in our context here is an assertion. An assertion is when you are trying to verify a result against what you expect. So I have another request here is to predict the name's age with a test. So I'm curious if I put in different names, will they be greater than 36? That's what this little bit of JavaScript is here. This test is essentially a little bit of JavaScript that Postman interprets after a request has been sent and a response has come back. So we can hit the send button. It's got the name Jen here. Can't imagine why. And you can see here that the age is actually 31. But I have in here this Postman clause here where I'm expecting greater than 36 for this particular value that I've parsed out of the response. And over here in the test results, this particular test, its result is right here. So this is also a great way, aside from assertions, that you can have different aspects of the response exposed. Maybe there are just other things that you want to keep tabs on as you're doing requests. You can do a lot of really fun things with the test results. And this has ages 31, which is the format that I have for the result. And then it's letting you know why logically is this why is this a fail as opposed to a success. So let's try to find, let me think of a name that's maybe older, like Victoria maybe? Let's see. Oh man, the body on this, age 63. I'm sorry for the Victorias out there, but yes, this one passed the assertion because we successfully guessed an age that it assumes is older than that 36. So there you have it. So some other types of testing that I just wanted to cover briefly so that these terms are familiar to you. Integration testing is when we're trying to test how different systems actually communicate to each other, right? And to make sure that they both are sending and receiving the things that they expect, and they're working across various scenarios as everybody expects, right? And as the logic has been intended. So a lot of integration testing does involve API testing, because API testing is a great way to have applications talk to each other. It's exactly what it's for. So that's a very common term that you may hear in the industry. Functional testing is all about verifying, let's say if you have code changes, that the exact change has done the things that you've intended. So those changes and the intentions of those changes are functionally verified. They're exactly verified to that expectation. Now this is different from regression testing, where you're looking at a system or an application holistically to say, is it still working in the way that I expected outside of these small changes I might have made in one area of the application? I didn't somehow upset the apple cart in a completely different area. So that's one other type of very common type of testing that you can see. So they really work hand in hand to make sure that you have coverage of testing and everything's working as you expect well across the entire application. So let's talk about some Postman terms. So in the world of Postman, you can have an assortment of variable types, and they can be referenced in a lot of different ways. It can be through the logic of the request, or it could be even afterward in those tests. There's just a whole array of things that we get to use. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what these different variables are, and I will mention them when I have them in use throughout the example APIs that we're going to look at next. So local variables are temporary. They're only accessible in the scope, right, variable scope of the request script. So since they're really just scoped to that single request or a collection run, they're not available afterwards. So you can't come back and reference them if that's something that you want to keep tabs on. But we have other things that you could use for that purpose if you wanted to. So the next level up from here is if you want to look at a data variable that comes from an external file of some kind, could be a CSV, could be a JSON, used to define a data set, and you can use that when running collections, and you can of course run them within Postman using the collection runner. Now we're expanding our scope a tiny bit here. The next up is an environment variable that enables you to tailor your processing to different environments. So for example, like a local testing environment versus a production environment. You can have just one environment active at a time, so that if you have a lot of different requests that are accessing different areas of the app, perhaps in a sequence, they will all stay within that same environment, which could be like a same server, for example, whatever that may be. So the next level up is a collection level variable. It's available throughout the request in a collection, and they're independent of environments. They don't change based on the selected environment. So again, this is just giving you more in your artist's palette of API testing, different things that you can use for different logical scenarios, depending on whatever it is that you might want to do. Now, the final subsection of variables that we have here are global variables. So these enable you to access data between collections, requests, test scripts, the whole 9 yards. It can be available to everything, everywhere within a workspace. So this is something to keep in mind. There may be values that you want to have that persist across environments, or they persist across collections. This is a great place to be able to have those variables. I will say though, the caveat is that if you have other folks working in your workspaces, you'll want to let them know that they're there. They're a little bit less obvious, I feel, than some of the other variable types. So if there are, like, say, like a username that needs to be put as a global variable, for example, you might want to give folks a heads up on that one. Let me give you an idea of where that is, actually. We have this drop down up here in the top right. I have no environment selected at the moment, but you can actually select environments here. Or if you hit this I button, you can look at both environment data and globals right here. So you can have a very quick view at both. So this is a great place to go when you are first getting acclimated to a new workspace. All right. Let's talk a little bit about iteration data. So when you are running, doing what they call the collection runner, let's say you have a series of requests that you want to run in order because you're maybe talking to different endpoints in a specific series. Maybe you want to emulate what a customer might do, or some area of your application where it's going to be doing something a little more complicated than just like one request to one endpoint. This is exactly what you would want to set up for those types of testing scenarios. So what you can do is you can also have essentially a library of data for different variables that you would like it to cycle through. Maybe you want different names or different, amounts, if it's payments or whatever it might be. You can set that up in this iteration data so that you can actually cycle through it. We'll have an example of that in a little bit. So let's take a look. The example I have here is that you could have a CSV that has just a drink name here, and a list of drink names. And you can essentially have the same data but in a different format. I have the JSON example right here. So if we go to take a look at this iteration data collection here, I have a search cocktail by name, and it's got this drink name right here. And it's going to figure out some drink names on its own, but I want to give it some specific drink names to substitute into that particular field. So what I could do here is, from here I can do run collection. Okay. I'm going to deselect everything that's in this particular collection because that's a lot. That's not really what I need, but I would like to search the cocktail by name. Now, what I can do is select a file, and it's opened up in another window here. I'm going to choose that, that iteration data file that we were just talking about, and I have this updated right here, and it shows that there's 2 iterations in that file. So that's how I know it's read that file correctly. We're going to run that particular session for just that file. Ah, and look at this. It looked up both margarita and it looked up gin and tonic with this cocktail database API. So it was able to reference my iteration data and then make those additional references, and it returned some test data based on some assertions that I had set up earlier. All right, so let's take a look at snippets. All right, we're going to dive into those sample APIs in a minute here. So if we're taking a look at these tests, and maybe I have a lot of tests already cooked up and I already know that I need some more, you actually have this little bar over here which may or may not be expanded by default, but this little arrow here will give you some example JavaScript that you can use and reference and be able to add to what you're doing. So maybe you want to get a particular value from an environment variable. You can have that reference right away. There's all kinds of fun little references in here that are useful. A very common one is that your HTTP response code is a 200 and it is on the happy path. So that's a common one there, but there's a couple of other ones here that you can also use and get in there quickly. All right, let's go to those example APIs. All right, time to play. So let's take a look at some requests, and we're going to take a look at how those work. So I'm going to minimize these folders here. We're going to take a look at Place Kitten. I bet you never thought there would be an API related to cats. Of course there is. This particular API, you can send it any combination of height and width, and it will return the picture of a kitten that matches that particular, those dimensions. So here I have just the parameter I only have right here in the URL. It's not even parameters. It's just simply / height / width, I believe. So we're going to instead use what's called the pre-request script, and we're going to set some values. So this is just a real simple example of what those local variables can be. So kitten width and kitten height, right? I'm going to set them to 800 and 300. Let's see, do we get a beautiful kitten? Of course we do. So now it's at that different dimension. So you can just modify this and then get a couple different guys back. I'm going to do maybe 500 by 300. Oh, I got a different guy. He's a different size. Fabulous. But this is just a very simple example of that variable relationship that you can have with pm.variables.set, and then you set the name of the variable and then its value. And it's really that simple. That's it. All right. So that's the variables with Place Kitten. We're going to look at the audio DB as well. So this has got some parameters. We're going to search by an artist name here. So we can take a look. Let's see what I've got set here. Oh, the band, yes. So great. So that's prog rock band. So we're going to take a look and see if any data has come back. Oh yeah, they've got a website here. They've got their genre. So we can look up all sorts of folks. It even has like this biography in English, all sorts of good stuff here. Again, now this is set from an environment variable as opposed to a local variable. So I can also have up here, I currently have no environment set, but I do have here a sample environment. So we could take a look at this sample environment and see all these sorts of different values that I have set up for different requests and things that I might want to check out. So if I wanted to do, let's see, how are we looking for David Bowie? I can go ahead and send that. And there we go. Good old David Robert Jones and his biography here. So we can look at this. This essentially is just yet another key value pair in the parameters, but we're substituting just the same. Essentially this format for the variable you can use in a lot of different places in Postman to get a new value in there. All right, let's see, what's our next one? Oh, National Weather Service. That's right. Okay, so National Weather Service. All right, I've got a lot more examples here that have different parameters, just key value pairs, but I also have some latitude and longitude values. Now I can set them here in the pre-request script, or if I took this out and sent it, guess what? It's still got values because they are set up here in the sample environment. So you don't always need to use the pre-request script to even set variables at all. You could just potentially set them up here per environment and have them referenced. Now I do want to call out something about these environments just so that you know, in case you're looking at other either shared workspaces, but you can set essentially an initial value so that when a new user comes into Postman and takes a look, they're going to have some values to work with by default. And then if they send a request and it keeps that value, it'll stay as the current value. Now, something to keep in mind is this current value column, all the values here are all local only. So if you are in an environment where there might be, you know, passwords or usernames or, you know, other, you know, more, you know, confidential information that you don't want to share out, what you can do is leave this initial value null and instruct your users to only include it in the current value. And that way it won't sync up to the Postman cloud and it won't otherwise share across users. So that's a pro tip that I recommend depending on what you might be working on in the future. So there we are. So we can check out some weather. This API is actually from the U.S. government. So it's got a lot of different information based on latitude and longitude. It can give you all kinds of weather readouts and all sorts of details about like the forecast. It'll get you to, you know, different specific websites. You can pop this into a browser and see what this goes to. But it's saying that it's Greer, South Carolina, which is totally right. That's exactly what I was trying to look up. So I can tell that I could do assertions on that. I could look up parts of the results. And I can see that the forecast office is GSP, all these sorts of fun details depending on what my app maybe wanted to do with the weather. And then the last one, we looked at this a little bit earlier, but this iteration data collection where we substituted in different values, and we were able to use a CSV file and iterate over the data in that file and essentially run multiple instances of a request with that different data. The last one I'm going to share with you guys is this Poka API. There are so many different ways that you can send requests and send information and think about the logic of the things that you're sending. GraphQL is a way that you can create a query and send that to an API and get results back. It's not something that I'm particularly strong in just yet, but I wanted to give you some exposure to this in case it's something you want to play with. And who doesn't want to play with some Pokemon? So we're going to do that right now. This particular search is just looking for a particular generation of Pokemon. We just want to look within this generation 6 to see what comes back, and I can already see we've got a Chespin, a Chestnut, Fennekin, all these different Pokemon that are related along with their ID numbers, so we could do additional follow-up queries for those particular Pokemon. So this is a great free example if you want to get your feet wet with that. Now Now, one other piece that I wanted to give you some exposure to is the Chrome extension for Postman. It's called the Postman Interceptor, and what it'll do is it'll actually give you your API request history from your browser and bring that into the history in your local Postman app. So when you do that, you'll actually see over here, it's on the left-hand side under History. You'll have all kinds of requests in here. I've actually done this before, so I have like Google Docs and all kinds of things that are in here that are possible to poke around at, and Google Play. And you can just see what the browser is sending and receiving and have it immediately in this format to be able to edit if you want to just take a closer look at maybe the body, or if you were testing an application, you could use this for creating all sorts of test scenarios. So there's a lot that you can gain from that. So some next steps. You can go to the Postman Learning Center. They have a lot of documentation on how to use Postman, so I highly recommend it if there are just other things you'd like to do that you're not sure quite how to do. I have also a list here of other places to go to find more APIs to play with. The Postman Explorer, which is actually an area of the Postman app, you can go there and find companies have made workspaces for their applications like Twitter and all sorts of other bigger apps. And you can have requests that are at the ready for you to go ahead and make a fork of that collection and play with it as much as you like. And then, of course, I've got some other resources here that have lists of APIs that are fun and often free for use. Thank you so much for hanging out with me in this API testing journey. I'll catch you next time. Bye.